All right, welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, we're going to talk about all of the virtual pinball cabinet parts that you're going to need for your build, where to get them, how much they cost, and all of the little things that you need to know in order to make this cabinet just perfect. So, let's talk some pinball parts. Yeah! Before we get going here, just a gentle reminder that this is for a budget 1080p virtual pinball cabinet build, and so I'm trying to replicate something that is $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 for only about $1,500. Now, my version of budget as to what maybe in your budget may be different, so just take this into consideration that this is my parts that I'm using for my build, trying to get it as authentic to a Williams wide body cabinet as I can. But if your budget is way less than mine, then simply just look at the parts that you need in order to make your virtual pinball cabinet. And in the interest of keeping this video short, I won't be talking about anything that is DOF or LED strips or LED matrices or power supplies to go with that stuff, because I will do a future build and a video just for that. And in the interest of keeping this under budget, I have done a little bit of research and I have decided not to do all of the mechanical things that are usually added to these virtual pinball cabinets. So I am not going to be doing any solenoids, any kind of contactors, any kind of real flipper motors, shaker motors, gear motors, and all the extras, which can be added later, and I probably will. What I am doing for this video is I'm going to talk about the SSF, so surround sound feedback and all the parts required for that. So for my research, a lot of them were blown away how well that system worked, and keep in mind I can always add on real stuff like a real knocker or a real gear motor or a real shaker motor to complement the SSF. So that's what I'm doing. Feast your eyes on $1,500 of pinball parts. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but don't worry, you don't have to go and spend this all on your first paycheck. You can slowly do what I did and spend it over about a year, and then it seems a lot more manageable for most people. And keep in mind, if you are doing a really budget build, you don't even have to buy most of this stuff. In fact, when I start talking about this stuff, I'm going to start with the things that you really do need to have in order for this thing to look like a pinball cabinet, and then you can decide at that point when you need to check out for the video, because you don't need the other stuff. And I will put timestamps in the description below so that you can jump to whatever part you're looking for your cabinet build. So let's get started. Now, with me being a DIYer, I really did try to find some used pinball parts locally around me to be able to fix up and restore and put into a cabinet. But the only thing I could find was pinball cabinets that were about $1,500, and they were working, and it would have been a shame to tear them apart. It's kind of a faux pas in the pinball community. So a lot of the parts I'm going to show you are brand new, and keep in mind that I live in Vancouver, Canada, and so I tried to buy locally and in Canada, but often we can't compete with the pricing in the States. This stuff was often less than half the price, and even with shipping and even duty, things were still cheaper. So keep that in mind as we go through these parts. First part up is our actual pinball legs. Now, I kind of think this is a requirement if you're making a cabinet. This is what's going to make these things look real. And you're going to buy the style that is the style that you're building. So for example, for me, I'm building a Williams wide body. So these are Williams / Bally legs. I got the chrome version of it, and I bought these from Pinball Life. They were the cheapest ones to go for, and I think they look great, and they're going to do the job perfectly. And from a DIYer point of view, could I make these? Yes. Would I make it for cheaper than $54? No, not a chance. By the time you buy the material, do all the work to get it look like this, buy the riv nuts, weld them, polish them, and then go get them chromed, there is not a chance that you would ever get these for a set of 4 for $54. So, good purchase there, and I think these are going to make the cabinet look great. Now, because I decided to go for the legs from Pinball Life, I also went through their website and I looked through absolutely everything that I would possibly need to buy, and if it was a good price, I went through them so that I could have a one-time shipping charge. So these are the other things I bought. So these are the leg brackets. They were $6.25 each, so not a bad price. And these are what the pinball legs will bolt into on the inside of the cabinet. And they actually screw to the cabinet so that if you ever take the pinball legs off for shipping or transport, you just have to bolt them back on, and there's no alignment needed or anything like that from the inside of the cabinet. So in order to fix these in place, I went and bought a bunch of number 8 by 5/8 slotted hex screws. and this whole bag was $4.50. Now when you buy the legs, they don't come with levelers, so you're gonna have to make sure you buy these. And for the 4 with the hardware to be able to tighten them up and adjust them, it was $5.24. So really good purchase, make sure you get those. Now the leg levelers you buy are steel on the bottom, so wherever you put them in your house, they're gonna scratch up your floors. So for $10, you can get a set of these silicone casters that go onto the feet. And the very cool thing about them is you can actually pick the color. Now I went with black because I thought it would be a little bit more generic. However, if you've got like a green Ghostbusters theme or a yellow Simpsons pinball theme, then you can definitely get the color that match your theme. So pretty cool. All right, in the theme of protecting things, these are cabinet protectors. Now these ones are plastic, but you can also get them out of foam. And the idea behind these guys is that they go underneath your legs when you mount them to the cabinet, so that when you are constantly nudging this thing, the legs don't start to wear the paint and the expensive vinyl artwork on your cabinet. Now you can get them in different colors to match your theme of your cabinet, which is quite cool. I went with black, just it's kind of generic. So for 15 bucks, that's some pretty cheap insurance to keep your artwork looking nice. I had to buy the bolts for the legs as well. So these are Williams Bally extended silver leg bolts that are 2 3/4 inch long, and they've got the authentic kind of slight acorn look to the top. These were all $6. And then don't forget to buy the nuts for those, and that bag of nuts is literally $2. Another purchase from Pinball Life are these plastic channels that hold the playfield glass in place. One goes on the left and one goes on the right, and for the set, this was $15. Now the way these plastic channels work is there's a little groove here that is slightly less than 1/4 inch, so you're gonna buy 1/4 inch tempered glass for your playfield, and you're gonna slide that in, and it's gonna be nice and secure in there, yet have enough kind of movability that you can slide the glass up and down to access things like your monitor. Now on the end here, you can see there's a little burr or a spur on the edge here. This is the part that you're going to slightly hammer into a 1/16 slot that you're going to cut with a slotting cutter in a router on the edge of your left and right sides of your cabinet. Now to go with those side plastic channels, we also need one for the rear. This one's also from Pinball Life, and it was $8.50. Now it's the same idea, it has to hold the playfield glass. However, this back one has to deal with the issue that the glass is at an angle. So this mounts perpendicular just underneath your back box, and then these plastic pieces here are a lot longer, and there's a bigger gap here to allow for these plastic pieces to flex, so you can get the plastic in there at an angle, and when you're done, it'll hold it nice and tight and put this nice flat surface on the top of your cabinet. And now for one of the highlights of this build, a brand new coin door. Woo! How cool is that? Now I really did try to find a used pinball coin door to restore and fix up so it could be a lot cheaper, but my source for arcade coin doors locally had lots of arcade style ones, just zero pinball ones, and they are different. So if you're looking for making this look authentic, make sure you buy a wider pinball one, and of course for whatever model you're trying to replicate. So this is an authentic Williams coin door. Now, with the purchase of a $179 brand new coin door from Pinball Life, this also comes with some extras. It has all the bells and whistles on the back end here, so such as a nice connector or harness to be able to tap into very easily for all the buttons on here. We have the service buttons here so that I can do in-game volume up and down and all the different settings for the different games with those buttons. I just have to tie that into my button controller later. Got a brand new door lock with 2 sets of brand new keys. I've got the main power switch here so that on traditional arcades, when you open up the coin door, it kills all the power to keep you safe. But we could do that, or we could maybe have a new function that when we open this up, something else happens, such as maybe we turn on some LEDs inside the cabinet to have a really cool effect. And we have everything here ready for coin mechanisms to get installed in here. If we want to actually use real coins, at this moment I'm not going to. I don't really plan on doing that. However, I've seen some pretty cool things where you can add a leaf switch on the back here so that when you push the coin return, that's actually adding a coin instead. So we might do that in the future. When you're buying your coin door, don't forget to buy the hardware you need as well. You need 4 of these black carriage bolts. They have a little kind of square shape underneath the head that prevents the bolt from moving when you tighten them. They are 1/4 inch by 20, and you need 4 of the 1/4 inch by 20 flange nuts to tighten those up. I believe this was 75 cents and this was $1.60. So pretty cheap to make your cabinet look priceless. And then to finish off my order from Pinball Life, I ordered a $1.50 standard size pinball. Not really going into my cabinet, but just kind of a cool thing to have. I've never actually owned a pinball, and it's amazing to feel how heavy these things are in real life and to think that there's flippers knocking these things around like when we're playing them. Crazy. What I'm holding here is the lift channel that would hold the old translights or the graphics that were on a clear panel with lights behind it on the old pinball machines. Now, I'm not going to have that, but I do want to put in a 1/8 thick tempered piece of glass so that this function is still kind of retained and the look of a Williams cabinet. Now, my issue in particular is that they only sell this so long. I think at Virtuapin and Pinball Life, they only have them like 26 or 28 inches, whatever the standard kind of size is. But because mine's about an inch or so bigger than a standard wide body, they don't work. I would have had a gap at the ends, and I wasn't happy with that. So I looked and looked and looked and looked, and finally my boy Devron at Absolute Pinball in Saskatoon, Canada had these, and they sell them 30 inches. And I think they're sold that way for you to custom cut them down to whatever size you need, but I think I'm going to need the whole entire 30 inches for mine. So perfect, this will work great. Thank you very much, Devron. All right, next batch of parts comes from a company called Virtuapin down in the States. They sell everything to do with virtual pinball cabinets, including fully assembled ones and kits and the parts. And I did do a one-time big purchase from them so I could save on the shipping as well. So let's go through this one. All right, so first up is another absolutely required part, even on a beginner cabinet build, is your buttons. Now, Virtuapin sells I believe it's called an Ultimate Cab Builder's button kit. This was for $65, and it includes all of the buttons you will need for this cabinet, all in one package, which is really nice. So let's go through and see what's in here. These are the most important buttons that come in the kit. We've got 2 buttons for our flipper action and 2 for our Magna saves for certain games that have that. And they are 2 for each side, so the left and right of the cabinets. Now, instead of giving us the cheapo, clunky micro switch buttons that have a little bit of delay in that time, they are using leaf switches, so you can actually adjust with this nut where and how far you push the button down to get the contacts to connect, and you can get that delay down to almost nothing, so that way when you're timing that flipper hit with that ball, it happens exactly when you want it. Now, the rest of the buttons in the kit will get you going with any kind of cabinet that you want to build. The specific ones, we've got a launch ball that's for Williams and Bally tables. This would have been instead of a plunger or in addition, so that if you didn't want to actually pull the plunger rod, you could just slap that and get the ball to go. The green button's supposed to be for a coin in, insert coin, and then the yellow start button is a Williams Bally thing as well. Some tables had a start button to get the game going. This little guy over here is just a momentary switch. Could be literally for anything that you want. This could be even something under the cab to turn on the system itself. And then they give you these 6 multicolored rectangular buttons. You could make these just about anything you want. Extra balls, volume up, volume down, mutes, night modes, all kinds of stuff. It's really up to what you want to do with your cabinet. Now, I'm not a fan of these square-shaped ones, especially if I'm going to want to try to flush mount this. It just makes extra work. So I do have some other ones that I bought for the old arcade build that have a nice chrome bezel on them, and they're round, and they're more about this size. So I might switch some of these out to use those buttons up. And you can see these buttons have the micro switches on them, and it's not a big deal, especially for these ones. There's no worries with delays or anything, but you can hear them. And that kind of clicking loud noise is kind of a little bit annoying, and we don't want those on our flippers though, because there's a little bit of delay. You can see the time that it has to move over to get it to actually connect, and no adjustability on these. But for these button kits, it doesn't really matter. Now, in my mind, the next required part for a virtual pinball cabinet is an actual plunger, right? This is how a pinball cabinet works. You pull it back, when you let it go, the ball gets shot out. So if you don't have this, I think it doesn't look like a cabinet. Now, you can just buy this and have it not really do anything on your cabinet, just there for looks, or splurge a little bit, spend $159 and add their Virtuapin digital plunger kit. This is the V3 edition of this. And what this does is it now allows you to have some analogs, so literally physically pulling this out and letting it go, and seeing on the screen that the plunger is actually moving the same amount that you are pulling it out. And then you also are adding some nudge capabilities in here, because there's a board on here called a KL25Z board that allows you to have inputs and some outputs, and it has an accelerometer built into it so that when you actually physically nudge the cabinet up, down, left, right, it will sense that movement and show you that on the screen. So very, very cool. Let's take a quick look at what's in here. So looking at this kit, we've got the instructions on how to set this all up. We've got various wire connectors and harnesses to be able to get this to hook up. We've got a USB cable to connect this directly to the PC. There is the KL25Z board inside there, inside the electrostatic bag. I'm just leave it in there so I don't zap it and break it. We've got the plunger sensor tube, hose clamp for attaching, and a bracket to bolt the actual plunger to the inside of the cabinet. So everything you need for nudging and analog, pulling that plunger out and seeing it actually happen on the screen, which is going to give the illusion that this is more realistic. Very cool. Now, one other thing, this KL25Z board is actually really quite powerful, so it's not just going to be doing this. I'm going to try to use this only so that I have my inputs and my outputs, so all my enter a game and my coin ins and all that kind of stuff going through this board, and we'll see. It has only so many inputs and outputs, but because I'm doing SSF, I think it actually might cut it. So we'll just have to see though. All right, next part up from Virtuapin is the Backbox hinge set. Now, these are the part that bolt up into the bottom of the Backbox, and then there's a pivot bushing that bolts into the sides of your cabinet, so that way when you are playing the cabinet, it would be sitting like this, and when you want to transport the cabinet, you would unbolt some stuff in the back and then be able to hinge the entire Backbox down and lay it down on top of the playfield. So very cool. These are from Virtuapin, $27. And when you go to order your Backbox hinge set, don't forget about the hardware you're going to need. So for attaching to the bottom of the Backbox, you're going to need some of these black carriage bolts, 1/4 by 20. You're going to need 6 of them, and they come in underneath, and that way you can just tighten the flange nut on the inside of the Backbox, and on the outside, nobody can undo anything to steal your parts or anything like that. So you need 6 of those and 6 of the flange nuts, and then where this actually pivots, you're going to have a different size carriage bolt. It's called a hinge bolt, and then there's an actual pivot bushing that goes with that. So this goes in together, and when this is in the cabinet, this will actually pivot inside the hole of the cabinet, allowing this to move. So 10 of these carriage bolts is $4. 10 of these 1/4-inch flange nuts was $1.90. The bolts for the hinge, carriage bolts for the hinge, were $1 each, and then the actual bushing was $3.70 each. All right, next parts up are these computer fan covers. Now, I am going to be putting in at least 3 computer fans, pulse width modulated fans, and I don't want anybody putting their fingers through them, having any damage, so I've got these little chrome kind of grills. Now, these are not really going to be visible all that much. They're either going to be in the bottom of the cabinet or the back, but these are really cheap. They're $2.50, so I ended up buying 6, and I figured if I don't use them, I'll just use them for a future computer build. So that's these guys. All right, while we're on the topic of covering things up with mesh and screens and guards, these are 2 pieces of 7-inch by 7-inch speaker grill mesh, and this is what you could use to cover up and hide your speakers, whether they're round or square. And for $2.50 each, I figured I would just add them to the order, because I'm not 100% on what I'm going to do. I wouldn't mind doing some kind of custom form where I've got some like shape to the covers, and I could definitely try that with this. But for $2.50, man, even if I don't use it, that's not a huge waste. So this is for covering up your speakers in your Backbox. If you don't feel like making the Williams kind of speaker hole cutouts and then putting the mesh behind like they did, you can always kind of go out and get some speaker covers. They are cheap, $5 to $15 for a pair. And I honestly urge you to go and look for some of this stuff for free. When I was making my arcade cabinet, I was looking on Facebook Marketplace for speaker covers, and someone was giving away their Rockford Fosgate covers here. They were 4 of them for free. So 2 of them are in my arcade cabinet, and I've got 2 left over here, so these could even end up on this pinball cabinet. Some other hardware for your Backbox that I would recommend you pick up is your Backbox latch, or your toggle latch, and the bracket. They are 2 separate parts. The bracket was $2 and the latch is $4 or $5. Now what this does is when this is clamped and locked in place, this prevents your Backbox from falling down while you are undoing the permanent bolts or the wing nuts inside the cabinet. So it's just kind of like an extra safety feature so that you don't have your Backbox fall down and smash your playfield. And then these are your Backbox wing bolts. So these are the bolts that are going to secure your Backbox to your cabinet when it is in use. And these are the same bolts that you are going to undo once you have the latch put on, like the part we just talked about, so that you can set the Backbox down carefully for transport. Now, these were from Virtuapin. They were $3.50 each, so they're a little bit steep, and you could cut some costs by just using regular nuts and bolts and washers. I just figured, why not try to make it a little bit more authentic for a couple of bucks more? I think that's only fitting. All right, these guys are Williams Bally speaker panel latch brackets. Now, the Williams cabinets had a speaker panel that was serviceable, so you could take it out and get at access to the speakers or the DMD, etc. I'm going to try my best to explain why these latch brackets are useful and why they used them on a Williams cabinet. However, if you haven't already, there is an excellent resource out there called mjrnet.org, and it has absolutely everything you would need to know to how to make a pinball cabinet. Some consider it the holy Bible of pinball cabinet construction. If I can't explain it, I might show a couple pictures up here, and full credit to mjrnet.org. I've used that as a resource for building my own cabinet, and it's an awesome resource. Now, how this works is, let's imagine this is our speaker panel. You're going to bolt two of these, one on either side, to your speaker panel. And normally how this sits in place and doesn't move around is it sits in a C channel. And so when this is attached, this latch bracket actually sits into another piece of wood, just a small kind of like off-cut piece on the sides of the Backbox, kind of like in like that. And so once it's all installed, this thing is not moving anywhere. Now, when you want to remove this, you had to get rid of the translate, which we'll talk about in a sec, and then you could lift this panel up out of the C channel on the bottom, and at the same time you are getting the piece of wood out of the latch bracket, and then you could simply just take it out and disconnect your wires and service your parts. So pretty cool. Like I said, if you haven't checked it already, mjrnet.org, what a great resource. Thank you. All right, next part up is a Williams Bally Backbox lock and lock plate assembly. This is from Virtuapin, and it was $8.50. So this is going to help me make it look like a Williams cabinet and function like one. So the way this works is if you wanted to service the translate or the lights behind it or the speakers or the DMD, you would take your key, unlock the lock, and then inside the cabinet, the lock assembly comes away like this, allowing the translate to go up further, maybe like half an inch or an inch. And then on the bottom of the translate, it's normally held in place in a channel, in an H channel. And when you lifted it up, you could now scoot the whole translate out and out of the machine. And then once you've done that, you can actually lift out the speaker panel and service anything there. So good purchase, especially if you're trying to make this as authentic as possible. Okay, next really big part for the cabinet are these Williams Bally stainless steel side rails. So these are a set of two for $47.95 from Virtuapin, and this is what's going to go on the left and right sides of your playfield to hide the edge of the plywood of the cabinet and to hide the plastic channels that hold the playfield glass. Now, I'm kind of choked a little bit because either when they got packed or shipped, both ends got mangled here, you can see. I'm kind of hoping I can just straighten it out by hand and be careful with it, and I won't have any much dings or anything like that, but kind of choked to have to do that. If you pay $2.95 extra, you will get the double-sided tape. It seems like they've already attached it for me, so that's kind of cool. This is what's just going to allow this to attach better to the side of the cabinet. That way it's not flopping around. Now, I have heard from people that make sure that this is the very last thing you do, because if you throw this on top of your vinyl graphics and then decide to take these off for some reason, this is going to rip up your vinyl graphics. So make sure this is the last thing you got to do. And it has a protective coating on here that I'm going to hold off till the very, very end before I peel that off. That way I can keep these looking nicer for longer. So, very cool. And while you're at it, don't forget to order your hardware for your stainless side rails. These are 832s by 1 carriage bolts. They're chrome, so they look really nice with the side rails, and they come with flange nuts that match so that you can tighten it up from the inside. They are 50 cents each, so this whole bag of 4 is $2. Okay, on to a very important part for a cabinet build, which is the wood itself. Now, you kind of have a couple options, but the main ones would be MDF or plywood. Now, they both have the pros and cons, and I'll tell you what I went with, but MDF, I like kind of using MDF usually because it is very flat. You don't have to worry about warped wood. It doesn't tear out when you cut it. Sand's easy. It's really easy to drill and machine and cut. So I kind of like MDF, but you'll pay a little bit more, and you do have to wear a respirator because of the nasty stuff that's in the dust, and it is a bit heavier. So keep that in mind. Now, Plywood has its own benefits. It's a little bit lighter, and if you are using cabinet grade plywood like I am, it should be very, very flat for you to use. You still have to watch out for the tear out, and I'll show you some tricks when we make the cabinet to prevent tear out. But the main reason why I'm sticking with the 3/4 inch birch cabinet grade plywood is the fact that I'm putting in the surround sound feedback, or SSF, into my system. Now, MDF will dull or deaden the sound and the vibrations coming off our exciters, whereas plywood will act like a speaker box and vibrate it back out for us, and so we should hear things a lot better using this plywood. And that fact alone is the main reason why I went with this. Now, I ended up buying 2 sheets of plywood. I'm pretty sure that we can get this whole thing made out of one, especially if we use other wood for things like the bottom of the cabinet or the back. I paid $240 for both, so roughly $120 each after taxes and everything. And I was lucky enough to get it shipped right to the shop. But if you don't have that luxury, you can always get them to do a couple pre-cuts, figure out exactly where you want them. And I can get them to do that there so they can fit into your car. And while you're getting your plywood, don't forget to pick yourself up a good old Canadian 2x4. And I don't know if this is pine or fir. It really doesn't matter. Just look at the price tags and get the cheapest one you can. And usually they come in a big kind of pallet of these things. Kind of look through them and see if you can find one that's half decently straight. These things can have crazy twists in them and warps. So try to get one that's kind of straight. But if it's not perfect, it's not a big deal. I'm going to be turning this into all of the miscellaneous things that this cabinet needs, like glue-up blocks or battens. There's a couple things in the back box, like the spot where the lock goes into for the translight, and a couple of angle pieces. And in the cabinet, we've got these angled kind of pieces that go for our brackets for our pinball legs. So we're going to make this all out of a $4 2x4. Now off camera, I'm going to be turning this into 1 inch by 1 inch glue up blocks or battens. But if you do not have a planer or a table saw to be able to do that, then you can just go buy 1 inch by 1 inch material. If you're going to do that though, try to make sure that you get the straightest stuff they have there. That way you're not fussing with warped wood and kind of big twists in it and stuff like that. And like I said before, if you want to save some money, you don't have to spend expensive, high-quality cabinet-grade plywood for the bottom of the cabinet that nobody sees or the back of the cabinet. So if you've got some scrap woods laying behind from an old arcade build or just sitting around, go ahead and use that stuff. Nobody's going to see it anyway. In fact, the original Williams cabinets, the bottom used to be made out of particle board for the same exact reason. Don't spend money that you don't have to. When you're at the store getting your plywood, I also recommend you look for this stuff here. This is C-channel, and it's made out of aluminum, and it is 8 feet long and 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch external dimensions. And what we are going to do with this is going to be the C-channel that holds the bottom of the speaker panel to the bottom of the back box, so it won't move anywhere. And then I'm going to cut 2 more pieces off of this to kind of fake an H-channel. So the bottom part would go to the top of the speaker panel, and the top part that's going to get screwed all together is going to be the H-channel that holds our glass lift tray. So this would go in here like this. So very cool and very cheap. Like I said, I think I spent like 12 bucks. And because this is aluminum, you got a couple options of finishing, right? We could sand this up to like 2000 grit and buff it and polish it right up to a chrome finish, maybe clear coat it so it doesn't oxidize. But in my case, I think I'm just going to make it look kind of blended right in. So I'll scuff it up and paint it whatever color I do with the back box. Now I chose to just buy the one piece because there is no way that my speaker panel is going to be whatever this is, 3/8 or 5/16 to sit right in this channel. But it's not a big deal to just take a very thin cut on the bottom of my speaker panel so that even if it's 3/4 inch plywood, it would still fit in there no problem. And before you leave the store, don't forget to get yourself some multi-purpose wood glue. Don't be fooled by all the fancy names and glues that are more expensive than others. Just get yourself a good name brand wood glue. And then you're going to need some screws as well. So make sure they are for wood. And there are more expensive ones that are kind of like for outdoor environments and things like that. So just get the cheaper wood screws. I always get Robertson heads on them because they just tend to stay on the drill bit or the screwdriver a lot easier. Makes constructing things a bit easier. And you've got to think about the length. Now, if you've got a whole wide assortment at home, not a big deal. But if you're buying specific screws for a project, you've got to think about the thickness of the material you're going through. So you may be putting 2 pieces of your 3/4 inch plywood together. So that's 1.5 inches. So if you were to get screws that were 1.5 inches or 1 3/4 or 2 inches, you're going to have screws going right through. So kind of keep that in mind as you're doing this. So I got a 100 count here. The more you get, the cheaper they get. of 1¼ inch screws. So when I go to put a screw through the 3/4 inch plywood, and I am going to recess it a little bit, then I will have 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of bite into the other piece. So these will work, and I think I have some screws left over from the arcade cabinet too. Okay, now let's talk audio. So for the 2.1 surround sound setup, where the music is coming out of the back box and punching you in the face, and then you have a sub that's usually inside the cabinet pounding the bass notes down through a hole in the bottom of your cabinet. Now, you can get a used setup here for relatively cheap, so look on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, and you can get something probably 10 to 20 to 30 bucks. However, I went with brand new, and mostly because of my experience when I did my arcade cabinet. So what I did is I spent $120, and I got a pretty high-end Logitech Bluetooth setup. And the main reason for that is I had a really good experience with my arcade cabinet. You want to listen to some music in addition to what's going on in your pinball cabinet, or you could even just turn it down because you still have your bumpers and everything else making sounds and stuff through our SSF system. Take your phone out, open up Amazon Prime, take out your playlist, press play, and you have your own custom music to your own pinball sounds. So pretty cool. The other thing is just all these other weird scenarios that where your phone gets a phone call or you're watching a video, and now instead of listening to the speakers in your phone, it is now coming right out from your pinball cabinet. So I went with that. This one is an 80 watt, which doesn't sound like much, but these things are absolutely insanely loud. You have to turn them down because they're just too loud. And main thing is they sound really nice. Very clear, very clean. I think these kind of setups are getting more and more refined every year. Okay, now for the really cool stuff, the SSF, the surround sound feedback. So what you are looking at right here are exciters. So they're kind of like speakers, but instead of pushing airwaves and getting the music to come out at you that way, they are designed to vibrate whatever surface you mount these to. So these are literally going to shake and vibrate the plywood cabinet to make the sound. And the cool part of that is that because our hands are on the side of the cabinet holding the flipper buttons, we will feel those vibrations. So you will feel the clunk of a flipper or a gear motor or a shaker or anything like that, and be able to feel the ball rolling down the playfield. So very cool. Now with these exciters, it's kind of hard to explain without having it all set up ahead of time, but I did find something to kind of illustrate how this thing works. Now this is just one of these kind of little music boxes, and when you turn the crank, it kind of twangs these little pieces here that make a certain pitch, and then the tune is just where the bumps are. So now when you play this just in your hand up in the air, it has a certain volume. But when I put it down on something, kind of like an exciter being attached permanently to a cabinet, you can see it's quite a bit louder. So it's the same idea, sending vibrations through the actual cabinet and making the sound pop through that. And because your hands are on the cabinet, you're going to feel the vibration as well. Cool. So what you are looking at is two 2.1 surround sounds. So there are two puck exciters and a bass shaker for each of those setups. So let's open this up and take a look at them. Now taking a look at these puck exciters, these are from Dayton Audio, and I went with the DAEX 58 FPs. These are 8 ohms and 25 watts. Now the 25 watts is important because you have to use that to figure out what size amp you need to drive these. The only other thing I would suggest with these is make sure that you have type that you can actually screw and attach to the cabinet, because some of them come with just like a double-sided tape and you're supposed to just stick them on. And I can't see that lasting long, considering these things are vibrating and shaking all day long. So for these little guys, and the idea behind these placements is you're going to put two kind of near the back or the midway of the cabinet, or where you would be simulating things like your pop bumpers and things at the back of the playfield. And then the other two are going to be as close as you physically can to where your hands are on the side of the cabinet pressing the flipper button, so that way that you can feel the vibrations of the flippers right there on the actual button. Pretty cool. Can't wait to test these things out. So these little pucks were $27.50, and I had to buy 4 of these guys. Look at this guy. So this is a Dayton Audio BST-1 bass shaker. And it's the same thing. It's an exciter, so it's making vibrations. It's just the low bass notes and the low frequencies that this one is going to be accomplishing. And same thing, make sure you've got one that you can actually screw to your cabinet and not glue. And placement for these guys, there's going to be one at the very far back for the stuff at the rear of the playfield, and then one near the front for the front stuff. And man, these things look so cool. It's a shame we're going to be hiding them inside a cabinet. Awesome. So these bass shakers were not cheap. I had to buy 2 of them at $79 each. So hopefully these really make a big impact inside the cabinet and make this thing rumble like it should. All right, now to power up these exciters, we needed an amplifier for each of the 2.1s, so I ended up getting 2 of these. And instead of going the LePi, which is a very common route that people have done on these arcade cabinets, I went with a Damgoo 50 watt plus 50 watt plus 100 watt 2.1 channel surround amplifier. Now the main thing that you're looking for when you get one of these is that they have a TPA 3116 chip. And it's a very common and very powerful chip for these amplifier boards. The other thing you're going to want to look for is the fact that this amplifier provides more wattage than what you are asking from your speakers or your exciters. So in this case, this will provide the speakers with all the power they need, and so there won't be any kind of clipping. Now this kit looks like it kind of saves on cost by letting you kind of put it together a bit. There's a cosmetic cover in here so that you can tell what all these mean and your buttons and things like that. Now if you've been following along, I just said I'm putting 3 2.1 surround sound systems into this pinball cabinet. And so you're going to need a computer that has a sound card that will handle 7.1. Now, my motherboard doesn't really have really easy access for putting an internal sound card, so I'm going a cheapy route and doing an external 7.1 surround sound system. So let's take a look at this little guy. All right, I've got a StarTech 7.1 USB external sound card that I bought for $45 on Amazon. And this will be cool. I'll just be able to plug it in through a USB to my computer and I will have 7.1 surround. Now the crazy thing about this is when you open it up, I was absolutely blown away how small this guy is. Like he's not even the size of your hand. And what this guy's going to let us do is it's going to let us separate the music from the actual mechanical clunks and flipper and rolling ball sounds. So with surround sound setup, we are going to say that the music only comes from the Backbox speakers, and then the rear of the playfield mechanical sounds, like the bumpers and things like that, will come through one of the 2.1 surround exciter setups, and then the flippers and the front of the playfield sounds are going to come through the other 2.1 sound, so that all the vibrations and sounds and vibrations are coming from where they would normally be. So very cool, and we'll go into more detail on how this is all set up later when we do the cabinet. Next time you're at the dollar store, you're going to need some cables to hook up from that 7.1 surround sound card to your amplifiers. So you're going to need one for each, and these are just aux cables, so 3.5 millimeter to 3.5 millimeter. Make sure they are stereo, otherwise you might end up with mono ones. And you don't have to worry about how long they are. I bought 6 feet because that's the smallest they had, but you could definitely get away with less because that external sound card is probably going to be sitting right next to your amps anyway, so not a big deal. But I got these for $2 each. Now one thing you may or may not need, depending on how you have your system set up, are these ground loop isolators. Now electricity makes noise, and you don't really normally hear it until you start having audio systems that is picking up that noise, and when you amplify it through an amplifier, you can really hear it. And so if you have weird humming or buzzing in your sound effects, especially when you turn up the volume, you may be listening to the electricity that's coming from all the other power supplies and devices that are hooked up to your amp. So a quick fix for that is these ground loop isolators. You simply plug in this end into your amp, and in our case the other end is going to our 7.1 surround sound card, but otherwise it would be going to your sound card on your motherboard. Now because we have so many power hungry devices inside of these virtual pinball cabinets, we have to talk about power supplies. Now there are a whole bunch of options, so let's delve into these. All right, depending on what's inside your cabinet, you're going to have different power supply requirements. So typical voltages are 5 volts for things like button lights, any kind of computer boards, any USB devices. They're all going to be 5 volts. And then the next common one is 12 volts. So 12 volts is going to be possibly your LED light strips, which can also be 5 volts as well. Your amplifiers for your 2.1 SSF system. They're going to be 12 volts. And just about everything else is running in 12 volts. Now, there are also higher voltages that are used in pinball parts. So if you have a real knocker or real flippers or real shaker motors, they might be running up to 24 volts. So you just have to get the power supplies that you require. First up are these used Xbox 360 power supplies. Now, I really, really like using these because they are dirt cheap and readily available at almost any thrift store. In fact, every time I go to a thrift store, I look for these, and if there's one, I pick them up. They're usually $4 or $5 each, and they are 12-volt power supplies that have 16 amps, so a ton of power in these guys. And you can also cut them up, cut the ends off, and depending on how you wire them, you can make them switching or non-switching. So that's really cool. If you would like to know how to use these and how to come up and turn them into a power supply for your arcade cabinets, there is a great video for this that I just made, and I will put it up at the top. Another possible solution for your power supply for your cabinet is these computer ATX power supplies. Now, you are going to need one for your computer, and so I'm not really going to talk about that. That one should be separate, and that's part of your computer. So this is in addition to other things besides your computer. You can actually use the same kind of power supply. Now, I would not recommend you go and buy some crazy expensive 750, 800, 900 watt power supply. You don't need that. In fact, I would urge you to go the other way and find a used power supply out of a computer that's got some other thing wrong with it, and somewhere around 400, 450, 500 watts. That way you've got enough power to get out of them. Now, the cool thing about these guys is they don't just supply one type of voltage. Now, this looks like a brand new power supply, but it's actually my old one out of my old gaming computer. But it's got all the stuff to talk about here. So this is the power supply here. Obviously, we're going to put this to the back of the cabinet so we can get all the hot air going out of the cabinet. You're going to have a power cord that has to go to your power strip. And then on here is all these different connections for you to be able to get other power supplies going out. And so if you have any of these used power supply connections kicking around your house, like I kind of just keep these around, and every time I need something I go looking for it, and I usually have a connector. You can use those connectors and then just basically splice them to the different components that you want to use. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but on the side here, it's very cool, is it's not just a 12-volt power supply. This one is a 3.3 volt, 5 volt, and a 12 volt. So there's lots of options on here for your various components. So see what I mean? This one power supply came with a whole pouch of different connections and cables, and you never ever use all of them. So all I ever do is I keep these and hang on to them. And in the future, when I need something like this, you just can go rifling through and find what you need. Now, each of these connections will help you tie into a different spot on that power supply to get your different voltages. And you can either try to retain these connections. I think they're called Molex, but I think they're also commonly called Molex, and they're not. But these different power supply connections can be used straight up, or you can cut the wires and splice it into whatever you want to supply power to and then connect it that way. Now, if you are going to use one of these ATX power supplies, it's important to remember that there is no motherboard telling this power supply to turn on and off. That would normally be done by a motherboard. So you may have to jump a couple connections here to trick the power supply into thinking, yep, it's turned on, give it some juice. And then the other thing is some of these power supplies are load sensing, meaning that if they don't sense any devices being on and using power, then they will turn themselves off. Easiest to tell about that is when you plug this all in and it doesn't turn on, then that's going to be a load sensing issue, especially if you have your jumper already set up. Or it does turn on, but it only lasts a couple of minutes and then it shuts off and it doesn't power anything up. So just a couple things to think about if you're using this power supply. And then another option for power supplies are these guys here. Now, these power supplies are kind of bare bone power supplies. They're so cheap that they don't even give you the cable that comes with it. And the reason why is that these are actually meant to be kind of power supplies that are built into equipment, into devices. And they can bring the cost down by not supplying that stuff. Now, you can get these in just about any voltage you need, so 5 volt, 12 volt, 24, or even higher. And then the other thing you're going to look for is the actual wattage. So how much work can this power supply do? And why that's important is if you're wanting to have a power supply to, for example, power up all of your addressable LED strips, then you have to make sure that you have enough wattage to match the wattages of all of the strips added up. So I have pre-bought this ahead for my lighting, so it's not technically needed for the rest of my cabinet, but this one's going to be for my LED addressable lights. And this one is a 300 watt. And so once I add up all of the strips and the LED matrices, it's getting up there. It's about 200, 250 watts. And I should have enough to squeak in a couple LED strips underneath the cab for under cab lighting with this guy here. Now let's take a look inside here. Here you can see there's literally nowhere to just take an AC cord and plug in to get this thing to power up. They expect this to be going inside of a machine or equipment, and they fully expect you to take the AC cord and cut it open and take the 3 wires, your live, neutral, and your ground, and actually connect it to these terminals here. And then the rest of these terminals here are your positive and negatives for the 5 volts. That's what this is, a 5-volt power supply. Other things, we've got a fan here, so you're going to want to make sure you're mounting that so that the hot air is blowing out the back of the cabinet. And there is a switch here, so you've got to make sure that you have it set to the right voltage for wherever you are in the world. In Canada, you're going to be leaving it on the 110 setting. With all these components inside this sealed cabinet, we are going to have some crazy heat going on. We got 3 monitors and a computer and multiple power supplies. It's a bit much. So we got to have some cold air coming in and some hot air getting pushed out. So we are going to need some computer fans. Now, you can totally cheap out and just get some big computer fans, 2-wire ones, and just have them hardwired in so that when the power is on, they're on. However, they can be really noisy, especially if you have a whole bunch of them. So I think there's a bit of a more elegant solution. Now, you can get these guys. These are 4-pin pulse width modulated fans, and with something else I'm going to show you in a second, you can get these things to spin quietly and only turn on when they really need them. And there's even a little bit more tech that can warn you when there is too much heat and give you a little warning. So you can go buy these. They could be about 15 to 20 bucks each. You don't need to get all the fancy lighting, but if that's what you want for your design, you totally can. Now for me, locally, I've got a place called Memory Express. They're pretty good pricing, but online you should be able to get something comparable. I went and it was cheaper to buy a 5-pack of these, and I figured I was going to use at least 4, and I might even just throw all 5 in, and this was $59.99. Now to power those pulse width modulated fans, we have to have something that has a pulse width modulated signal, and that's what this little board's about. So this is a 12-volt powered control board for 3 pulse width modulated fans, and you can actually splice the fans off with a splitter. You just have to watch that the total of the fans don't exceed the maximum amperage for the board. And then these little guys, there is a temperature probe that checks the temperature where you place the board, and then if it is ever over your settings for temperature, it will actually sound an alarm so that you can actually hear that the temperature in your cab has gone too hot. So it sounds like a pretty cool thing we could use for our virtual pinball cabinet. Very cool thing, and it is $13.99, so not a bad purchase. Now for our next part, I want you to imagine something. You want to play on your virtual pinball cabinet. So you plug it in, you turn the switch on the back, and then you find the remote for the one TV, and then you find the remote for the other TV, and then you get the monitor turning on, and then you get your lighting turned on for a power supply inside. That would suck, right? We want this all to happen very flawlessly. Hit one button, boop, that all clicks on, all the monitors click on, everything goes on like it's supposed to, and we are playing pinball within a matter of seconds. So that requires this guy here. So this is just a power strip, right? Just like what you got at home, or like a surge protector. However, this one has a built-in function where you have a master outlet, and the rest are slave outlets. So what that means is if you plug in something like the computer for this pinball cabinet into the master spot, that means that whenever you turn on the computer, it will allow this to turn on, and it will now allow and turn everything else that's plugged into these slave outlets, like the other monitors and any other power supplies and things like that. So you're going to need one of these. This is $44.99 from London Drugs locally in Canada, but this would be something similar online for your pricing as well. Now, you don't need this. There are other workarounds. You could just get a regular power strip, but you're going to have to design some kind of relay so that it senses power has gone on to that strip, and then it forces power to go on to the other power strip. So it can be done, but honestly, I think this is a bit more slick of a system. You don't have to start cobbling together stuff to get things to work for power, not for 44 bucks. And then while we're on the topic of getting power to our cabinets, you are going to need one of these. This is an ICE E320 power outlet switch. This one's got a switch on it, so you can kind of have an on-off to the whole cabinet. It's fusible. I think it's 10 amps fused, so that if there's something crazy wrong in your cabinet, you're not burning up the cabinet. And your spot for your power cord outlet. Now, these are about $10 each, but the more you buy, the cheaper they are. So I got a 2-pack here for a future project down the road, and they were 15 bucks, so about $7.50 each. So not bad. Now, they don't come with the actual power cord, but don't go buy this. Don't do that. Go to your local recycling station where they're collecting computers and TVs and things that are broken. And every single one of those things has this exact plug that you need. So just ask politely and go scoop up some of those for free. Now, once the power is inside the cabinet, you also have all your devices to wire up inside. So you are going to need some wire. Now, first up is audio. You are going to need some 18 gauge minimum wire. Get some speaker wire that automatically comes in red and black for obviously positive and negative. This is a 50-foot roll, which I figured was more than enough, and it was $16 on Amazon. And then we have 22 gauge for all of the other little things. So if there's not a lot of power going to it and it's more just a signal, right, to detect that a button's been pressed, things like that, you can go a little thinner on the wire, but I would not go thinner than 22 gauge. And for 20 bucks, I have a bunch of different color wire here. They are 30 feet rolls, or 9 meters. So probably enough in here, and if not, I can always order it again. If you can find it cheaper at your local automotive parts store or your hardware store, then go ahead there. But for 20 bucks, I've got a whole bunch of colors here, 22 gauge, it'll work perfect for me. And with those wires connecting to all these various parts, you can totally just solder the parts together and solder wire to wire. That works. However, a little bit more elegant of a situation would be to get some Dupont connectors. So this is a 620 or 650 piece male and female header connector for Dupont connections. And so this will make it so that you can set things up to, for example, your KLZ25 board a lot easier. This goes onto the board and then you just click, click, click and just plug it in, and it's very slick. Now, in order to make these connections, you also need a Dupont crimping tool. So this tool was $20 and this kit was $16.99 on Amazon. Now, to pretty up the edges of the back box where you see the rough edges of the plywood, you're going to want to buy some of this stuff. This is called T-molding, and it just makes the edges look a lot finished and polished. And the cool thing is you can get this in different colors. So if you're trying to do a certain theme for your pinball cabinet, you can just order the color that you need. Now, this is some leftovers from my old arcade cabinet, so it's actually chrome once you peel back this blue protective coating. And it's only 5/8 thick, so I can't use this, but this is T-molding, so I'm just showing it to you what it looks like. For my cabinet build, I'm going to have to order some 3/4 inch wide stuff. And I was originally thinking that chrome would look good. However, if you look at the 90s William cabinets, they kind of just were black. So I probably will just get black 3/4 wide T-molding. And I'm going to order it from tmolding.com. This stuff is very, very cheap. It's something like 30 cents or like 70 cents a foot. So it's really quite reasonable. And don't cheap out and get just what you need, right? You are going to get your cabinet built, measure out what you have, and get even 5-6 feet more. Because if you are short, you're going to end up with a cut line and have to reorder more anyway. So get a little more than you think. It's not that expensive to have that. And if you end up with some extra, you never know. You'll have a cool project to work on later and you'll have some T-molding. So the other thing you're going to need is this slitting cutter or a slotting cutter. So mine was from Freud. This is a 63-150. The main thing is that it is a 1/16 slit that it creates inside the wood, which matches the profile of the T-molding. So if you don't have one of these, you're going to have to buy one of these. I had one for my last cabinet build, and here you go. I got a tool that I'm using again for free. So cool. Probably one of the last items I'm going to buy when this cabinet is almost completely done is the actual glass itself. Now I'm going to need 2 pieces. I'm going to need one for the playfield and one for the back glass. And I'm going to go and find a local glass cutting place to get this made up for me. Now I'm going to need a custom size for my cabinet. So that's part of the reason of waiting until it's completely done. So I will measure the width, the length, and I'm going to get 3/16 thick tempered glass for the playfield, and then the back glass is going to be 1/8 thick. The 1/8 is so that it fits the plastic lift channel, much like the original thickness of a translate. So they're tempered because we don't want these things, if they ever break, to turn into 1 billion shards of glass in our cabinet. So we're going to do that. And then the other thing is, when you specify tempered, you can also specify for them to not leave the little tempered symbol in the glass so that you're not looking through it when you're looking at your cabinet. Now, pricing, pretty hard to say, I haven't bought it yet, but it should be around 50, 60 bucks for the playfield glass and maybe half of that for the back glass. Now, when you go to put your lockdown bar on top of your playfield glass, there is supposed to be a foam tape seal there, otherwise known as the beer spill foam tape. So I guess if you were to spill a beer while you were applying it, it wouldn't go into the cabinet. Now, you can go buy that, but when I looked, it was all pre-cut lengths and you couldn't order it differently. So mine's a little bit wider. So instead of doing that, I just looked around the house and I actually still had some truck canopy cap foam tape. That is really the same thing. It's double-sided, so it sticks on both pieces, and it's squishy enough that it will take up any spill in there and prevent liquids from going in. So I don't know how much I spent. It was probably somewhere along the line from $10 to $15, and I had enough to do my whole entire canopy on my truck, and this is what was left over. So I'm going to see if that works. If it doesn't work, I'm sure I can go and find something similar with a different thickness if it's too thick or too thin. All right, and speaking of lockdown bar, this is where my budget virtual pinball build takes a slight detour. With me living up in Vancouver, Canada, by the time I get a custom width lockdown bar, so 150 bucks roughly, and then I need to buy a lockdown receiver, which is about $170 to $200. By the time I get those two items shipped up here with duty and taxes, I'm looking at $500. And for me, I think that is a ridiculous amount of money for a piece of smooth metal that I put my hands on at the front of a cabinet to play pinball. So, me being the DIYer welder fabricator that I am going to attempt making my very own custom lockdown bar and receiver system. So in order to do that, I have purchased $22 worth of these 2 toggle clamps. So as long as my lockdown bar has some kind of J-hook or a latch underneath it, then these toggle clamps will grab onto it, and from inside the coin door, you just have to pull the handles down and that will lock down the lock bar. So look forward to a video from me and I will show you how to do that for yourself. All right, some optional items that you may want to purchase for your virtual pinball cabinet are the following. This is a used Xbox 360 Kinect camera. I picked this up at a thrift store for $20. And the idea behind this is that when you were playing certain tables, so future pinball tables only, it uses eye tracking software to adjust items on the playfield so that as you move your head around, you can literally feel like it's a 3D world and looking underneath the ramp, and everything looks a little bit more realistic. So I'm excited to try this out. I haven't done it yet, but this is something you may want to purchase for your build. And the other item is a game controller. Now, this one is wireless, but you can also just get a plugged-in USB game controller that you could plug into the front of your pass-through socket that you're going to install in the front of your cabinet. And why I'm suggesting this is that not only pinball is going to be happening on this machine, I will also probably be putting in some vertical arcade MAME games and any of our old systems and things like that. So these are going to allow you to play Donkey Kong and Tetris and all the other games without having these chunky buttons and joystick on the top of your lockdown bar, which I personally can't stand that look. So this makes a pinball cabinet that looks like a pinball cabinet, yet when you want to play other things on it, it is quite doable. And I'm really quite impressed by this. I was playing on this on my big box setup at PC at home. It's very smooth. It's got vibration in it, analog controls. All the games play really slick on this. All right, that's about everything you're going to need for your virtual pinball cabinet. But keep in mind, it's not absolutely everything. I'm sure there's going to be little things that I'm going to stumble across that I will need. Things right off the top of my head. I might need some power and ground distribution blocks. It might be a random HDMI to DVI cable, things like that. And keep in mind, I am not doing a full bells and whistles virtual pinball cabinet, which has all the mechanical stuff, like contactors and relay boards and solenoids and all that kind of stuff. So if you got to do that for your cabinet, go for it. But for mine, that will be future upgrades, which I have heard that this hobby is kind of like that. You think you're done, and then there's always something else to add. Some chimes and an air motor to blow wind in your face for certain games like Whirlwind and things like that. So if I do any of that stuff in the future, I will definitely share it with you guys. And keep in mind the DOF and the LED addressable strips and matrix, that will be coming in its own separate video later once the cabinet is getting close to completion. There's a wrap on another video from Way of the Wrench, this time on all the parts you need to make your virtual pinball cabinet. Now, if you may have noticed, I did not talk about anything about monitors, so your playfield, DMD, and back glass monitors. And the reason for that is I already made a video on that in great detail, so go check that out. And I also did not talk about the PC that you need to run the software. So I did actually make a video for that as well. So go check that out, and I show you how to make a cheap, if not free, gaming PC for your virtual pinball cabinet. Now, if you have any questions or concerns about the content or the parts, feel free to put a comment down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And I will put a link to all of the parts that I used in the video description below so that you can find them easier. And a special shout out to all my subscribers. We did it. 5,000 subscribers. That's awesome. And what's even cooler is my analytics are showing that in 6 months, I might be even 10K. So that's really awesome. Special thank you for you guys making it get to that point. If you haven't joined us already, we're on Instagram, Way of the Wrench. And until next time, take it easy. Now get out of here. I got a pinball cabinet to make.